Is there any good reason you should spend twice as much on a bottle of sparkling wine from Champagne versus somewhere from, let's say, California? What's so special about Champagne? And with so many different styles, how are you supposed to pick one that suits your palate? The answers to those coming up next. Hello and welcome to another episode of Wine This Week with Scott Leek. In this week's episode, we are focusing on one of my all-time favorite types of wine, sparkling wine, specifically from Champagne, France. Now, if you haven't watched last week's episode where I focused on Cava from Spain, another type of sparkling wine, please go back and watch that before you open a bottle because I demonstrate the proper, safe way to open a bottle. And there's a couple steps you might be missing. Number one, this bottle I started off by putting this in my deep freezer for a little while. This thing is very, very well chilled, and that's going to help it prevent it from over fizzing when I go to open it, and it's just going to make it taste more delicious. Most sparkling wine from around the world, and all sparkling wine that comes from Champagne, is made in what's known as the traditional method. And the first step is they make a still wine just like they would anywhere else, doing regular fermentation in oak barrels or stainless steel tanks. And the product of that is called a cuvee. Then step two is blending. And there's a number of different ways that they can blend. So after the blending is done, however the winemaker wants to do it, it goes through secondary fermentation. So they take all those cuvées that they blended and they put them into individual bottles and they seal them with just a regular old, like a beer bottle cap. But they add into it more yeast and more sugar. The yeast is going to eat that sugar and it's going to produce more alcohol and it's going to produce carbon dioxide. It can stay in there for as long as they want it to. And as those yeast cells die off after they've eaten the alcohol or drowned in the alcohol, they are dead cells inside the bottle. And here's a little kind of dramatization of what that might look like in the bottle. So this is actually just sediment. So I don't know if you can see the kind of black sediment at the bottom of this, but I'm kind of mimicking what the dead yeast cells might look like inside a bottle going through secondary fermentation. Those lees, the dead cells, are going to add a lot of flavor to the wine. It's going to add yeastiness, breadiness, brioche, biscuits, all kinds of great nutty flavors, almonds, and a lot of different things. It's going to mellow that out. It's going to add creaminess, and it's going to help kind of suppress that maybe astringency of having all that acid in the wine. That process can go on in a non-vintage for a minimum of 15 months, and in vintage wines like this one, it could go on for 3 years at a minimum. This one went through it for almost 5 years. This one went through it 8 years. Sometimes they go through it for 10 years. It just depends on what the winemaker wants to do with the style of wine. So how do you get all those gross dead yeast cells out of there before you drink it? So over time, this bottle that's been sitting there like that, see now they're all stirred up, someone's going to come along or a machine's going to do it and they're going to slowly tilt it and turn it and tilt it and turn it until all those cells work their way down into the neck. And whenever they're ready to let that go, they're going to put this in a solution, freezing the neck of this ice cold freezing solution. They're going to pop off that beer cap bottle or the beer bottle cap, and that frozen chunk of the dead lees is going to shoot out. Now it's going to be filled about that much, and you don't want to bottle something with that much in it. So the next step is they're going to add what is known as the dosage. They're going to add more still wine, and then they're going to add a little bit of sugar. That sugar can range from 0 to maybe 3 or 6 or 12 grams per liter in a Brut style, all the way up to 50 grams per liter in the more sweet styles. After that, they put the cage on, put the foil on, and maybe age it a little bit longer in the barrel, in the bottle, and then it's ready for us to enjoy. Now, when it comes to picking out a bottle for yourself, there's 3 primary factors that are going to help you find the right one for your palate. And those are the dosage, the sweetness level, the grapes, and the vintage. So let's talk a little bit about this dosage and the sweetness scale when it comes to sparkling wines. And I'm going to do a little experiment to help demonstrate this. Now, I'm going to take some lemon juice here, put it in there, and this is pretty close to what champagne was probably like when they first started making it hundreds of years ago. It was really, really acidic. The grapes didn't ripen enough, and it was probably pretty gross. So they would take a sip of it and probably look something like this. By the way, if you ever really want to know what I mean by this wine is somewhat acidic, you can do that little experiment and find out. Whew. So, what do we do to solve this problem? Well, we add sugar. So, French, Dom Perignon and his friends back in the 16 and 1700s decided, let's take some simple syrup and add that to our acidic wine mixture. Now that's delicious. And in a nutshell, that's what you need to know when it comes to the dosage on your sparkling wines. The thing is, when they first started making sparkling wine, because it was so acidic and the palates back then really craved sweetness, because sweetness was kind of a cool thing and they didn't have Twinkies and Coca-Colas, they put a ton of dosage, a high level of it, to the point where 250, maybe 300 grams per liter, which is like 3 times as much that's in a Coca-Cola, would go into a bottle of sparkling wine. And eventually they started making it a little bit drier. They made the styles a little bit better, palates changed a little bit. But it started with that super sugary one, and it's worked its way down. And then they made one called demi-sec, or half dry. And then they made one that they just called dry. And then they made one that they called extra dry. And still at that point, by our palates today, those were fairly sweet, but they started very sweet and worked their way down. So what do you do when you start making it drier than extra dry? Well, there's a long story behind why the term Brut came up. But Brut was used because the wine was actually kind of brutal to the palates at the time. So the term Brut was then what was used to describe an even drier wine than dry and extra dry. And today, Brut is the most common style of wine out there, but there's now extra Brut. And thankfully, this is the last one. There's now one called Brut Nature, which basically is a 0 dosage. There is no grams of sugar added whatsoever. So as you are looking for the styles of wine or sparkling wine that you might like the best, understand that sweetness scale started with crazy sweet ones. Think of the lemonade example here and how they started with a ton of sugar to outdo that acid and work their way to making them drier and drier. And that's why when you see a dry or extra dry, no, it's not the driest style. It's actually a little bit sweeter than you would think. As I mentioned, there's 3 primary grapes that go into making champagne: Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay. And you can get a Blanc de Blanc style that's made with just Chardonnay. You can get a Blanc de Noir that's made with the reds. There's also rosés, which when they add the dosage and that little bit of still wine to fill the gap from the disgorgement that came out, they might add plain still red wine to give it a lot more of that rosé color. So they might add plain old still Pinot Noir to make a rosé. And the styles are going to be noticeably different. In a Blanc de Blanc like this one that's made with all Chardonnay, this is going to be more crisp, a little bit more lively, maybe more apple and lemon and all kinds of different white fruit notes. With a Blanc de Noir or a rosé that are going to have the red grapes added, those might have more strawberry or cherry. One of my favorite $20 Blanc de Noirs out of California reminds me of strawberries and cream. So that is something else to understand, is the style of wine you're getting based on the grapes that were used. And the names kind of give it away a little bit. Now, the other thing would be the vintage. So as I mentioned, non-vintage champagne. So this one right here has no vintage listed on it. And that's the most common style of champagne. They don't even declare it a vintage most years because of how hard it is to make the grapes. Non-vintage is far more common. These are going to be blends of many, many different vintages, but the nice thing about the way they do it is consistent year after year. So whether you buy this bottle in 2019, 20, 21, 22, it's probably going to taste the same. Vintage though, because it is aged so much longer, that time that it spends with those yeast cells in there, that sur lie, that resting time on the lees makes it more nutty, more yeasty, less acidic, more full-bodied. So that is something else to keep in mind in terms of the style that you might like. So the dosage, the grapes used, and the vintage are the three things to look for in helping you pick out the right bottle of champagne for you. Nice. Oh, look at that. I love this part. It's like Rice Krispies when you just pour milk in it. Love the sound. So this, because this is a 2012 vintage, and I don't know how well you can see, I'll put some white paper behind it there for you. This is a dark yellow. Oftentimes, if I had opened a non-vintage or just like this, this bottle of Mum from Napa that's a non-vintage, it's not resting on the lees very much, so the color is going to be much more pale. This is a really nice, I'm even going to call this a deep golden, almost a little bit of amber to it. So, it smells like a bakery. Really nice. I mean, that yeastiness can be so good. I know it might sound gross to you that this thing had a bunch of just yeast sitting in there and they died and it sat in dead yeast cells for a while. But it just adds this creaminess to it that's fantastic. And yeah, the breadiness in this is great. I'm getting a little bit of lemon. Yeah, really nice nose on this. I'm just going to give it a little swirl. You can totally swirl your sparkling wines, by the way. Don't worry about it. You're not going to kill the bubbles before you kill off the glass. Ooh, oh my God, did that make a difference? See, this is why we experiment. This is why wine's so fun. All right, now I got like some tangerine. Yeah, the lemon's a little bit more pronounced, and I get this baked apple pie smell. So like some of the spices, maybe that's from the oak as well, but like this baked apple pie. This has got so much going on. This is awesome. Oh, all right. I can't wait anymore. I got to taste this. Awesome acidity. It's still not as bad as drinking the lemon juice, but similar sensation like on the sides of my tongue and the back of my mouth. Great acidity, nice and crisp. Oh, I'm excited to have this with dinner later. Delightful. The sweetness is really dry. I mean, 3 grams of sugar per liter in the dosage. This is extra brut. Very nice dryness. Love that. The tannins aren't there. Even though there's Pinot Noir, it really wasn't in contact with those skins, so you're not picking up any tannin in it. The alcohol, great alcohol, nicely balanced with everything. The body's awesome. I'm gonna call this medium bodied. Flavor intensity on this was, I'd call it medium as well. Really nice finish. Love it. Medium length on the finish as well. So much to like about this. All right, in terms of the flavors, I'm getting some of the lemon, I'm getting some apple, but there's this nice little like a white cherry that is that Pinot Noir coming through. That's awesome. I love that. The yeasty, bready notes is certainly there. There's just, I'm just gonna call it toast. It's like a nice fresh piece of like sourdough toast. That's what it is. Loving the lemon, the apple, the cherries, the toast. I'm not really getting as much of the oak or the oak characteristics, the spice on the palate as I did on the nose. This is excellent. I'm gonna score this 8 points. This is fantastic. I'm looking forward to having this with food. This can handle something with a little bit more weight to it. So I like matching the weight of the food and the weight of the champagne. So this would go well with something a little bit more dense like crab or lobster. I'm gonna have it tonight with shrimp, and I think it's gonna be a really good pairing with the shrimp and vegetables. So there you go, 8 points, delightful, and so many different choices, whether it's California, whether it's Champagne, but just know that Champagne is a little bit more expensive, mostly because of how it's made, where it's made, the laws associated with France, the scarcity of it, if you will, depending on who makes it. But this one, I was able to buy this vintage Champagne for $40, so way less than the yellow label stuff you might see, or the white label one that a lot of people know. So if you look around and you got someone that can help you, you can experiment and try some great things. Enjoy. Thanks for watching this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If so, give me a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Please join me next week. We move on to the most iconic white wine varietal in the world, Chardonnay, one of the key components of Champagne, but certainly does well in its own right. Until then, keep trying new wines, and as always, cheers.